Here. Today is the 2nd October. It's a Sunday. I'm giving up my Sunday video. Don't worry if you like trotting or meowing. It's my crazy zoo of animals here. Hopefully it won't distract us too much. So today is the very first video, and I plan to make a video every week to cover the material that we did in class. Okay, so the first one's probably going to be a bit crap, but hopefully over time they'll get much better. Okay, so let's start. Today we're going to cover plate tectonics because we learned about this in class. Okay, so I'm going to start by reading a little extract for you from the book Excel IGCSE Geography. It's like story, but in a grown-up way. So, yeah. Tectonic plates. The crust, the outside of the Earth is made up of a number of tectonic plates, which are the rigid blocks. Rigid just firm. Okay. The tectonic plates, which are the rigid blocks that make up the surface, so the outside of the Earth. These plates move over the surface of the globe. The globe is talking about a sphere, or in this case, the planet Earth. Types of plate margin. We covered the three main. There is a fourth one, but there are three primary ones and one extra. Okay. When two plates are moving apart, for example, in the oceans, the margin between them is called a constructive or divergent plate margin. The word constructive just means to build, so you can think about them as building. Okay, constructing. We construct a building. Divergent kind of means like moving apart as well. Okay. It's called this because magma, molten rock, it's very hot to remember. The molten rock rises to the crust and it fills the gap and creates a new crust. This is why we call it constructive. Okay, because constructive is building, and the magma that comes up between these two plates, between the gap, makes a new plate. It's constructing a new plate. Alright, so I want you to remember. Okay. When two plates are moving apart, for example in the oceans, the margin between them is called a constructive or divergent plate margin. It is called this because molten rock rises to the crust to fill the gap, and the word submarine, sub always means under, and marine just means related to the ocean, so under the ocean, that's all it is. Okay. This is happening, for example, along the mid-ocean ridge in the Atlantic Ocean. So the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there is this ridge. Remember that it always goes from north to south. The mid-Atlantic ridge goes from north to south, and it's straight through Iceland, which is why we have volcanoes there. Okay, bonus point. Okay, the second kind of plate is destructive plate margin. Okay, and this happens when two plates are moving towards each other. Like the Nazca plate. I'm not sure the pronunciation here, but I think it's okay. So when two plates together, like the Nazca plate and the South American plate, the margin between them is called a destructive convergent plate margin. So converging means that they're coming together, and destructive because something is breaking. Destruct. When you see the word E, it normally means to take apart. Something is being broken. Okay, from the Latin, I think. Okay, the edge of one plate margin into a swimming pool, you're plunging to your depth. Okay, so the edge of one plate margin, so one of the plates, is being destroyed as it plunges beneath. So two plates meet head on, and one of them gets pushed underneath. This is known as subduction. Subduction means under. It's the same thing here. Duction just means like under. So going under. Subduction. Molten rock rises to the surface to form volcanoes. Good. The friction between the two plates creates earthquakes. So remember what friction is, okay? if I take my hands together, what happens? They become, which is why we do this, causes friction. And this is exactly what happens when the two plates are colliding. They cause friction. Great job. Now, there's a third type of plate margin, and this is called a collision plate margin. We didn't cover this in class, so this is kind of the extra one. The other three are the primary ones, and this is like an extra. Okay? So a collision comes from the word collide, like two cars colliding. Two footballers be running for the ball and they collide. So a collision plate margin occurs where two plates meet head-on, okay? Head-on. But this time they are of equal density. So density is like how heavy they are, the consistency of them. So the previous example, destructive or convergent plate margin, one of the plates was denser and the denser one went underneath. But in this case, in a collision plate margin, the two plates have the same density or the same strength, so they hit head-on. Here, so the layers between the two plates are squeezed like toilet. That will also help you remember this word. Very good. Okay, so the two plates are head-on and they're squeezed upwards. The result is the formation of fold mountings. Fold mountings. We talked about this in class when we had our paper and we scrunched it when something heavy hit together. So two things, two plates, collision, pushed upwards. And this creates the fold mountains, such as Himalayas, that collision between the Eurasian plate and the Indo-Australian plates. So two plates hitting each other. Earthquakes, remember when the ground is trembling? Earthquakes are created by the pressure and friction. Pressure and friction. The fourth plate boundary type is the conservative plate margin. Okay, we covered this one in class. The fourth type of plate margin is referred to as a conservative plate margin. This occurs where two plates are sliding past each other. So they're not coming head-on, subducting. Do it this way if it helps you to remember. They're coming side by side. Because there's this occurs because two plates are sliding past each other. Okay, so in this case, there's no rising magma, so there's none of that hot, yucky stuff coming up through the gap. But there's no subduction either. There's nothing going underneath, nothing plunging underneath. There are no volcanoes. Remember that, no volcanoes. Instead, the friction from earthquakes, earth trembling, earthquakes. For example, California, between the Pacific and North America side. Tectonic plates shape the landscape by creating new rocks. Remember we talked about this in class, crustal rocks, where the magma is escaping, meets the colder air or the colder seawater, and it makes these crustal rocks. So tectonic plates shape the landscape, so they're creating new rocks and forming mountains and valleys. They do this by processes of volcanic activity and faulting. These are the forces on the planet. It is not surprising that they should give rise to the most awesome natural hazards. Okay, so we basically just covered chapter 3, hazardous environment, in your Excel book. Okay, now I've designed some worksheets over the weekend, and I'm going to give these to you in class next week. And I just summarised everything that you need to know and everything that you need to know from class this week, plus a few little extra things. So I don't know if you're going to be able to see these on here, but I'm going quickly now, okay? And just to help you remember, because when you get to the exam, sometimes you have a lot to remember and you might be feeling a little bit stressed, and you might forget words. So it's really just there as a reminder in case you have any last minute nerves. Alright? So, plate tectonics. Here is the world. You'll have a copy of this, so if you can't see it on the screen now, you'll be able to see it when you have a copy of your own. So the Earth is made up of 4 concentric layers. Concentric just means circular, so circular layers. The inside bit here is called the core, inner core. So it's the most central bit, a little bit like an apple, right in the center of the apple. The inner core is made from solid iron and nickel. Okay, so types of metal: solid iron and nickel. The layer on outside of this is the outer core. So you have the inner core and outer core. Outside of this you have the mantle. Mantle. Remember I talked to you about fireplaces in England, that we have fireplaces and we put flowers or photographs or mirrors on top of the mantle. So the mantelpiece. So here is the mantle. And the mantle is made from semi-molten rock. Semi-molten rock. Outside of the mantle is the crust. The crust. And you need to remember that this is relatively, okay, relatively thin. So it's about 20 kilometers. It's thin. Okay, so another word that you might hear is lithosphere. Lithosphere. And this is basically it's a name that we call the crust and the outer mantle. It's the colder layer, okay? We'll come back to that later on. Okay, so one way to remember the 4 layers is to think of the letters I-O, MC. So MC, think of like a DJ, like microphone control. I-O, the MC, when you need to give someone money. I owe you money. So I-O, MC. I owe the MC money. That might help you, or it might just make things very complicated. So I'll leave that to you. Okay, so the crust is split into pieces, a little bit like a big round jigsaw puzzle. We talked about these jigsaw pieces, jigsaws. Okay, so if you just imagine that the world is like a football and you've stuck a jigsaw puzzle on the outside of it, so the pieces are all next to each other. Thinking about some of the pieces are blue and some of the pieces are green, and this represents the 2 different kinds of plate, the 2 different types of crust, which we'll come to in a minute. Okay, so imagine your football and you've stuck on the outside some pieces. Okay, obviously in reality the pieces of the puzzle are tectonic plates, so every tectonic plate, and they are either oceanic or continental plates. The word a few of you asked me this question in class, and it's really good for you to remember. Tectonic just means the movement and the structure of the Earth's crust. So tectonic is just talking about the shape and the movement of the Earth's crust. Now, I told you that there are 2 types of tectonic plate. Like your puzzle on the outside of your Earth, blue pieces, green pieces. Alright, it's easy to remember. So the blue pieces of your puzzle are oceanic plates. Oceanics. These are under the sea. Under the sea. So they make up the oceanic crust. The oceanic crust. And the second type are continental. Continental, or your green pieces. Continental plates. And these are underneath the land. Underneath the land. Now, you need to remember the difference between these 2 plates, because it really affects how they collide, what happens when they collide. Okay, so just remember these things. So there are 2 types of tectonic plate, 2 pieces of the puzzle. And the first one is the oceanic plate, which is thinner, but it's denser, it's heavier, it's made of a much substance. Some of you had a little bit of confusion about this in class, so I'm hoping that this will help you to remember. And the second type of plate is a continental plate. Continental plate. Thicker than an oceanic plate, and but it's less dense, so it's lighter. It's lighter, okay? It's not so heavy as the oceanic. And they float on top of the mantle.